All right. Hey everybody, how you doing? Yeah, sorry I was a little late. We're having issues with the live stream, but hey, you know what? You're right. Cosmic Flamingo, I was getting those fire logs nice and toasty for you. Welcome to the very first ever Learn Chat Standards Fireside Chat. I am actually not in New York City. I am in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. My wife and I bought a vacation rental property last year. And of course, all of our bookings are canceled because of the pandemic. So we decided to come up here for just a little bit. So I do not have a fireplace in New York City. We aren't lighting fires on our fire escape. So really kind of feeling grateful to be here right now, and thought I'd bring a little bit of a little bit of fire for you, a little bit of warmth. I've got my coffee. I hope you got a drink too. Um, Today is just to hang out. I just want to hear how you guys are doing. Not really planning on doing music teaching today. Plenty of where that came from, obviously, with what I do. But just want to hang out and see how you guys doing during this pandemic. Like, these are crazy times, and many of us are in different kinds of situations. What's keeping you busy with music? What's keeping you busy otherwise outside of music? Like, how are you coping? How are you dealing with everything? So let me know in the chat where you're from, what you've been doing to keep busy. Would love to talk with you guys about that. Carolyn from Sacramento, glad to have you here. Paulo from Italy, glad to have you here as well. Hope you're staying safe out there, Paulo. I think what I'll start while I'm waiting for people just to fill in and let me know how you're doing, what you're up to with music or otherwise. I thought I'd share a few things that are helping me cope through the times. I'm not a therapist or a personal development person. I'm obviously a musician. I teach jazz, but I shared some of this on the podcast a few weeks ago and thought, let's share it here on YouTube a little bit. These are things that have helped me during trying times. Maybe you'll relate to some of them. I call them my three, they're not really mine, but my three defaults. So default number one is that are going right, especially amidst times when things are going wrong, right? I don't know what you're going through right now. Maybe you've lost a job. Maybe a loved one is sick. Maybe you're sick yourself. But something that's helped me is to spend some time during the day. I usually like doing it when I'm out on my runs, and helps me think about the things that are going right, and kind of deeper than just, hey, I'm grateful for this and this and this, but really deeper than that. Like, I'm grateful for this and what makes this a difference in my life. For example, um, I think about, I got an office space last year so I could move out of my home and start working for you guys, Learn Jazz Standards community, and serving you guys, recording videos, podcast episodes out of my office in New York City. And that really changed my mental health. Like, I had no idea how much working from home was actually bothering me from doing it from years and years and years and years. And so that's been something I'm really grateful for. But then when I think deeper than that, who am I really grateful for? I'm grateful for all of you, for those who support what I do here, right? And that makes me just grateful for every person who shows up to a live stream like this, or who listens to my podcast, and just how great that is, and how transformational that is in my life. So you can start going down these rabbit holes with different things, and really just meditating on what you're grateful for. So that's number one, is default to gratitude. The next one is to default to goal setting. So this is one that I'm really big on, and I think this is now a time to double down on our goals. And I'm thinking about musical goals. I'm thinking about our goals outside of music as well, right? I mean, now more than ever, now is the time to go, I want to accomplish this in my jazz playing. I want to accomplish this in my personal life, and to really set clear, defined goals for all of those things. So now is the time to double down on goal setting. So make a plan. If you're not doing something right now to reach your musical goals or your personal goals, start making a plan for that right now, so that even when all this is over, right? I mean, you're going to be so much further ahead of the game. And that's something that really helps me, is to feel like every day I'm doing something on purpose, right? A lot of what I do is here on Learn Jazz Standards, and to feel like I'm helping anyone out there listening to my podcast and helping them with music. Like that's something that gives me purpose. So I have goals always that I'm setting for myself day to day, week to week, month to month. So now more than ever, double down on those goals. So that's default number 2, default to goal setting. The last default, I think, has been an important one for me, and that is default to generosity. Default to generosity. So, study after study has been done, and it's clear that despite what we think that we feel better when we get things, we actually feel better when we give things. Right? When we're giving of whatever we have, not necessarily financial resources, but also giving of our time, right? So maybe right now is a time like there's someone who is a little bit older. I know I'm kind of I'm a 30-year-old guy, right? There's some of my friends are 60 years old, right? That's a time to get them groceries, right? Maybe it's helping a musician friend out with creating a sales page for their Skype lessons. That's something I've been doing and helping with, right? Because musicians are struggling right now. A lot of musicians are struggling right now who relied on gigs, who relied on um, teaching students in the flesh one-on-one, right? So there's all sorts of things we can do to default to generosity. So defaulting generosity, always think about like, what can I do to help? And that's going to make you feel better. So all 3 of these things, default to gratitude, default to goal setting, default to generosity, those are things that help me. I'm wondering for you guys, like, do any of those resonate with you? And on terms with the last one, default to generosity, something I'd love to do, and there's no pressure at all for anybody, but any super chats that come in today on this live stream, I'm going to be donating every single one of those to the Bowery Mission in New York City. They help the homeless. They're an institution that's been around for a long time. They provide shelter, food, clothing, programs for the homeless. And right now, the homeless, a lot of us are struggling. The homeless are also struggling. And we often don't think about those people. Like right now, they can't quarantine, right, in their house. Like they can't. And, just in New York City so far, the last time I checked, there's been 26 homeless people that have died on the streets due to the virus. And of course, with lack of testing, especially for the homeless, I'm sure that the infection rate among the homeless population in New York City is a much greater than we think. So if you guys would like to, I will be personally donating $300 of my money to the Bowery. If you guys would love to do that, all you have to do is click that super chat button. It looks like a little money sign at the bottom of the chat and donate whatever you feel. You don't have to, there's no pressure, but I will be taking all of that money and donating it to the Bowery Mission in New York City. All right, so I hope that some of those defaults helped you out. Let's take a look at the chat here. Lawson Gardner, Asheville, North Carolina, lots of collaborations with friends. That's awesome, Lawson, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but I have been Zoom chatting friends left and right, staying in touch with people. That's a really great way to cope for sure. That's one way that's been really helping me. All right, Jimmy C, enjoy your channel. Use B flat rhythm changes and Sweet Georgia Brown for daily warm-ups on guitar. Could you track an up-tempo, all the things? All right, Jimmy, thank you so much. I think you're talking about the play-alongs. I don't make any new play-alongs anymore. We did uploaded those a really long time ago, and I don't make any new ones of those. But thanks for using them, though. Michael C, greetings, Brent from Georgetown, Ontario. Slightly off topic. What guitar, strings, amp, and recording setup do you use in your videos and live? Thank you and stay safe. Hope you're staying safe too, Michael. So I have an Ibanez Artcore guitar, and whenever you hear me on my YouTube videos or my podcast or anything like that, I'm actually just plugging direct in to my audio interface and then adding reverb and compression after the fact. When I do play live, though, I'm using an AER amplifier. I can't remember what model, but I mean, those things sound so absolutely great. So that's what I'm using. Let's see, did you ask strings? Strings, I use D'Addario 13s. Okay. Hey, Brent and LGS community from Nutley, New Jersey. Charles, this is. How you doing, Charles? Hope you're staying safe in New Jersey. Ask away in the chat today. I'm really here just to help, and hope you're enjoying the fire, and I'm having a little coffee. I don't know about you. Okay. Purple Strap, man, you helped me a lot through my jazz journey. I kill time with my new music educational YouTube channel. I'm gonna upload my new video on tin, tin, tinnitus in an hour, by the way. Check it out if you like. Awesome, Purple Strap. That's awesome. Hope that you're having fun. It's fun to make content for other people, for other musicians, and hopefully have an impact on the other side. So I'm glad that I've been able to have a little bit of impact for you. Any questions you have, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm glad to help in any way I can. Dylan Ring, thank you very much for your 251 tracks. They're extremely helpful in my quarantine shedding. Glad you find those helpful. A lot of people find the play alongs we put up on YouTube a long time ago really helpful. David Bradford, greetings from Madison, Alabama. Thanks for being here, David. I appreciate that. Anybody, if you're coming into the chat right now, let me know how you're doing. Like, what are you doing with music to keep occupied right now during this pandemic? How are you using music to cope? Maybe what are you doing outside of music? Are you watching extra Netflix? How are you doing? I want to know how you're doing. James asks, is that a real fire? This is indeed a real fire. Absolutely. I mentioned at the beginning of the chat, my wife and I are here in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. Last year, we bought a vacation rental property. All of our guests canceled for obvious reasons. And so we decided, let's come up here, do a little quarantine action up here, get some of these city folks a little bit of nature. So that is indeed a real fire. Clifton Reed from Elk Grove, California. Hi, Brent. How's it going, Clifton? Thank you so much for joining on the live chat. James Houlihan, spending more time practicing. Awesome. That's good. I think a lot of people are spending more time practicing. What are you practicing, James? I would love to hear what kind of stuff you're working on with your jazz playing. That would be really awesome. Cosmic Flamingo, thank you so much for the super chat. That is going to be donated directly to the Bowery Mission in New York to help the homeless. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Cosmic Flamingo says, keep up the great work. Huge fan of the podcast. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Glad you enjoyed the podcast. If you have any suggestions, Cosmic Flamingo, for any podcast episodes that you'd like to see, let me know. And I'll add that to my request list. Okay. Lawson Gardner, any tips for someone planning on moving to NYC and pursuing a career in jazz performance? Ooh, that's a deep question. There's two parts to that. So one is moving to New York City, and the second part of that is pursuing a career in jazz performance. Where do I start with that? So first of all, let's talk about a career in jazz performance. It's important to understand that, and I want to say this to be very open and upfront about making a career in music performing or a career in jazz performing. I don't want to lead anyone to believe something that's not true. It is very difficult for one to make all of their living off of performing. It's not impossible. I have friends that do it. They don't make a lot of money. That's fine. You don't have to make a lot of money, right? As long as you're happy doing what you love doing. I personally used to gig 4-5 times a week at one point, 3 to 5 times a week, and did that a lot. I still was supplementing my income with teaching students. Obviously, now I run an online music education business. So I would say that for anyone wanting to pursue a career in jazz or music at all, these days, and maybe it's always been this way, but these days you have to be a little bit more creative than just saying, I want to only perform music or jazz, right? It's very possible. It can be done, but it's difficult. So I just want you to know that, in that it is wise to think about any different way that you can make money as a musician to make a living, if that's what you want to do. As far as moving to New York City, it's important to keep in mind, I don't know where you're from. I've been living in New York City for 10 years. I love New York City. Not everybody does. New York is a big, crazy city. It's a complicated city. So either you like it or you don't. So just know that it's kind of a city that can eat you up and spit you out if it wants to, or not. So just know that, you might want to come check it out a little bit, see if you like it. I don't know if you already have. When you're in New York City, you will learn so much because the musicians here are so good that as soon as you move here, and this was my experience, you're now like a minnow in a massive ocean. That's what it feels like, because musicians from all over the world come here to, not just for music. I mean, they do for all kinds of music, but for jazz, right? So, but you'll learn so much. I mean, if you really want to learn how to play jazz better, and you're really trying to pursue something more serious with it, then New York is a great place to be. Not that you have to be in New York, but it is a good place to be. I hope that gave you a little bit of context, Lawson, on some of that. Okay, Clifton Reed says, I've been shedding jazz standards one song at a time by posting videos of songs on Facebook and asking my friends to request a song. Wow, that's a really cool way to practice, Clifton. So one thing that I always suggest, obviously, is recording yourself. Recording yourself is really important, right? One thing in my courses, maybe some of you are involved in some of the courses, but one thing that everybody does is they record videos of themselves doing the quote unquote assignments, the material that we're working on, and they post it for everybody in the community discussion board, and people comment and give feedback and, all that stuff. It really kind of holds your feet to the fire a little bit. So I think what you're kind of doing is you're manufacturing that for yourself, and you're kind of holding your feet to the fire and making yourself practice and making yourself perform for your friends. So I think that's a really great way during this time where, we're all, most of us anyways, are quarantined, right? So that's a really good use. So that's a great tip. I hope everybody thinks about that. Okay, Mobius Drummer, did you ever like classical music before your jazz venture? I still love classical music. So I will never say I was a classical music aficionado, but I still love classical music. I like all kinds of music, to be honest with you. Like jazz is really, I'm a jazz trained musician, but I like all kinds of music. And I would encourage anyone who's pursuing jazz or elsewhere, or other kinds of music to be listening to as many different kinds of music, because you can find inspiration in other kinds of music to help you with jazz, and jazz can help you get inspiration and learn things about other kinds of music, especially jazz and classical. There's so much musicality within them that, learning a little bit of jazz or a little bit of classical can just, go leaps and bounds if you're trying to work on your rock composition or pop or folk or whatever else you play. It can be really powerful to do that. So I still love classical music. I listen to all kinds of music. So I do not discriminate when it comes to different kinds of music. I just realized like the screen is really bright from the sunlight coming from the windows behind me. So hope that's okay. Okay. I'm sorry if I butcher your name. I apologize. I think you're from Poland, just just by your name, Wojciech. I hope I got that right. You say, I have just bought your Jazz Standards Playbook Volume 2. Great work. Really glad you're enjoying that book. And that's why I make them, honestly, is so people can benefit from them. So hope that you're enjoying Jazz Standards Playbook Volume 2. Jeff Carter, spending my time working from home, trying to protect family and friends, lots of time running through the Salt Lake roads and mountains, solo, of course. Jeff, I am a runner too. I love running. I just ran a half marathon that I trained for, but of course the race got canceled. So it was about 3 weeks back. Things weren't quite as crazy in New York yet, but I went out and I ran in Central Park and I did my half marathon. The funny thing about running in Central Park is I had never done a race in Central or run in Central Park. Well, I had like years and years ago, but never around the perimeter of the park. And so in my head, I thought, oh, when I think of Central Park, for some reason, I think of it as a flat, big, rectangle. But it's not. It's really lots of steep climbs. And so I ran it in record time. I ran the half marathon. I beat my expectation. I think it was 1 hour and 33 minutes, some odd seconds. That's roughly 7 minutes and 8 seconds per mile, I think, something like that. Afterwards, I had to lay in bed. I was a little dehydrated because the hills just killed me. But I am a avid runner, so I hope you're enjoying your runs. That's definitely been therapeutic for me, is to try to stay healthy, going out for runs, of course, keeping distance from other people around. So yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah. Stay safe over there in Salt Lake. I know a lot of people are working from home. Who else here is working from home? I mean, I'm assuming everybody's working from home. If you're still working right now. And if so, what do you do? What do you do for a living? I'd love to get to know you guys better. That's kind of what this time is for. or whatever you want to ask me questions about. Um, Jeff Carter, please talk about your history with Bruce Foreman. I met him at a masterclass in performance at Utah State University with Corey Christiansen. I've also studied with Corey Christiansen a little bit. So Bruce Foreman was kind of, so for those of you who don't know who Bruce Foreman is, he is a really, really incredible kind of bebop oriented jazz guitarist from Los Angeles. I think originally from San Francisco. And he was kind of one of my first real the professional jazz musicians I ever met. So I think I was a senior in high school. No, or maybe I was a sophomore or a junior in high school. I can't remember, but there was a particular jazz camp that was just starting up that my band director was associated with the person starting it up. I think it was being held in Elko, Nevada, or something like that, some really small town in Nevada, and kind of an interesting place for a jazz camp. But Bruce Foreman was the artist in residence. I was lucky because the camp was the first year the camp started. I was the only guitar player, so I got to spend an entire week just studying with Bruce Foreman, and that was kind of like a big aha moment. Like there were several aha moments for me during my jazz journey, but Bruce Foreman was someone like, I mean, he was like teaching me all these things that I had no idea, and it was the first time I really got to be engaged with a very serious professional musician, and I was really inspired. And then years after that, I'd always go back to this camp, a couple years later, a couple years in a row, and I would study with him, take lessons from him. One time, we were going from we were going to that same jazz camp, but I was at the Port Townsend Jazz Workshop in Port Townsend, Washington, and he was also teaching there. And he asked for a ride, and I actually drove with him down to, I think it was in Twin Falls, Idaho. And our car got stranded on the road. We had to stay a night in a hotel. Anyways, Bruce is like kind of someone important to me. I've interviewed him on my podcast a long time ago when the podcast first started. I actually recently saw him in New York City. He does a sort of off-Broadway show, which is amazing. If you ever have a chance to check it out, called The Red Guitar. And I showed up at the show, and he was so surprised to see me. We hugged it out. It was really cool. That's my history with Bruce Foreman. All right. Looks like I gotta kick somebody off. One second, everybody. We had someone I had to get out of the chat here. Okay, Clifton Reed. I read that Jimi Hendrix is considered by some as the John Coltrane of guitar. What do you think? I've heard that before. I don't really know how to compare the two of them. I think maybe the comparison is just innovation. And I think that's very true. Jimi Hendrix was an incredible innovator. I sometimes actually wonder, like, what would have happened if Jimi Hendrix was still alive, right? Like, what would he have done? I know that Miles Davis was going to have Jimi Hendrix play. I forgot, was it on Bitches Brew, or don't quote me on that. So, but Jimi Hendrix was on Miles Davis's list to record with. Like, they wanted to do something together, and I bet you that would have been bonkers, crazy, amazing. Yeah, Jeff, I got rid of that guy who was posting inappropriate stuff. If you guys, by the way, see any of those, you can feel free to flag them. Mobius Drummer, what do you make of teachers who say learning the modes are cookie cutter teaching when it comes to improv? For example, Hal Galper has a video on this. What do you think their approach is then? Modes are cookie cutter teaching when it comes to improv. So kind of, if you guys have followed me at all, kind of my thought behind any jazz theory when it comes to any of that stuff is that it is important to learn, Oh, my fire is falling apart. A, that it's important to learn, but that we should never use music theory as crutches, right? We should use them as tools. I don't personally think there's anything wrong with teaching modes and learning the modes and thinking of them as pitch collections over different chords. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think they can be useful, and especially for people that are just trying to understand the language, using those things as tools can be very helpful. It's just when you start thinking about modes and scales as the only way you're supposed to improvise, that's when I think it becomes damaging and not very great, right? So the main important thing is to be learning jazz by ear. So what I mean by that is learn jazz standards by ear as much as you can. Learn some licks by ear. Learn solos by ear. That's how I did it. Like I spent 1 year, I learned 100 jazz standards in 1 year. Don't recommend anybody doing that. I learned 32 bars of a solo every single week for a year. I don't recommend doing that, but I will say that was really helpful in getting me to learn the language a little bit better and getting a hold of some stuff and really start to understand it. So I don't really ever like it when people say, all right. Um, I don't really like it when anybody says, one approach is completely wrong. Not that I want to argue with Hal Galper or anything like that, but um, you know, I think we can learn in a multitude of different ways as long as we're not relying on scales and theory too much as crutches. Um, Not sure how to get rid of this guy. That's really too bad. Yeah, I'm trying to ban him. All right. Henry Burberry says advice for young jazz musicians. Um, a lot of advice. Mainly, start learning jazz by ear. Practice consistently. I mean, I would say those are the main things. I don't know that the advice I'd give is any different for young musicians versus older musicians. It's really all the same stuff. If you have anything specific that you're wondering about with that, yeah, just let me know and uh, I can clarify that a little bit more. Charles Rigel asks, for someone who has recently started working through your lessons, would you recommend starting at the beginning with the blues, as I have, or include new lessons as well? There's a lot to cover. Cool. Um, That's hard. That's a hard question to answer without knowing a little bit of context. But the blues is definitely a great place to start when you're trying to learn jazz music, right? So the blues is going to carry a lot of that harmony that we need to know as jazz musicians. The blues is going to be really helpful for learning a bunch of theory that's going on, and the blues is going to be an important part of learning jazz language, right? So the blues is a great place to start. I do have a course called the Jazz Blues Accelerator. Um, Man, I don't know how to get rid of this guy. I'm so sorry, guys. Um, so blues is a great place to start. Oh boy. Um, Sorry, Charles. I know that was a horrible answer to your question while I'm dealing with the troll who is on the feed right now. Um, Yeah, there's so much to cover. If you feel like starting with the blues is a good place to start for you, yeah, just start on a little bit at a time, or just start by learning one jazz standard. I know jazz can get really overwhelming. My whole goal when I teach is to try to keep things simple, is to try to, make things manageable. So just start with one thing at a time, even if it's just one standard or if it's just the blues. So blues would be a great place to start. That's as much as I can give you without really knowing the context. Um, Malik Price, greetings from Houston. How important are triads when it comes to learning jazz standards? I think triads are really important because if you don't really understand triads, then you can't really understand seventh chords, right? So understanding triads is important for improv. It's important for understanding harmony. I know that lots of people like to use triads for music theory ways of improvising. I don't usually think that way, but yeah, absolutely, triads are definitely important to be using. Um, Henry Burberry, the idea of learning changes by ear is overwhelming to me. Any advice on how to start out doing that? Thanks. Yes. I do, by the way, have a video called How to Learn Chord Progressions by Ear on YouTube if you want to check that out. The first place to start is really just listening to the bass notes. So go through a song that you find is really simple, or even if it's just really hard for you to hear, I don't think it's a sin to put on a backing track that doesn't have a melody playing and just try to listen to what the bass notes are that are going on. So you can do it very slowly. Just start by listening to that first chord and stopping the recording and just try to, latch onto that bass note. Now, that's where like understanding some fundamentals of ear training, like intervals and all those things can be helpful, but you really just got to start ugly. That's the only way you can really start learning by ear is start ugly. Just get in there and try. So start by listening to the bass notes. So let's just say you got a 2-5-1 d do da, right, and you can hear those intervals d do da. All that's left is to fill in what chords are those actually. So that's when you start listening to the piano. What's the piano playing, and then you can just start checking with your instrument, like, does that sound right, does that start right, does that sound right? So process of elimination, right? What you do is you do your very best that you can, and then you pull up a chord chart. Because once you actually try doing something with that information and you put your best effort forward, then you're going to look at that chord chart and go, right, I wasn't hearing the right quality of chord there. And you start to hear patterns, right? So eventually, the first time you learn that 2-5-1, it might feel hard, but then the next time you hear it, you're like, oh, wait a second, I recognize this sound. It's a 2-5-1. That's how you start hearing chord progressions by ear. Is you start ugly, you check with a book or a piece of sheet music, and then you go back, right? And you keep doing that, and eventually you just start hearing the patterns. You start hearing, oh, hey, now we're going to a 2-5-1 to the 4 chord of the parent key center, right? That's just how you do it. So just start basic like that. Um, Check out that video too, how to learn chord progressions by ear. That will also help. All right. Um, Romans Legion, Doc from Dallas. I've been trying to learn to play jazz for past few years as an old blues guitar player. Use the chord tones to play the changes. Awesome. That's cool, Romans. Dan Aberman, any advice for someone who spends a lot of time learning and practicing technical skills, but has a complete block with arranging ideas and playing a song? So, advice for someone who spends a lot of time learning and practicing technical skills, but has complete block with arranging ideas and playing a song. Well, I think the advice I can give is just learn a song, right? So just pick one jazz standard. So start with Autumn Leaves. I don't know if you know Autumn Leaves. It's a really easy tune. So you're saying you have technical skills. So I'm assuming that I don't know if that means you can play over the chord changes or if you're just really good at playing scales or you have lots of flexibility on your instrument. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but the best thing you can really do is just start from the beginning, like learn the chord changes, learn the melody by ear. If you do that, if you start training your ear instead of just your technical abilities, then you're going to start be able to improvise over that tune. Then you're going to start to be able to play that tune. I'm not sure what instrument you play either, whether you're a horn player or you're a piano player or a guitar player. But just learn a tune and get just that one tune, get those chord changes down, get that melody down, right? That's all you need to do. Just start small. Like I said earlier, start ugly and just continually learn more tunes. That's the only way to do it, right? So stop working so much on scales and technical exercises and all that stuff and just simply work on learning songs. The more tunes that you learn, the easier it's going to get, the more all of it's going to make sense. So I know that's really basic advice, but that's really the only way to do it. Just learn more jazz standards. Okay. JD says, "Love you, Brent." Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Clifton Reed, out of music scope, I have many friends who live in Manhattan and Philadelphia. I actually work for a company in Philly. I'm the West Coast road warrior. How bad is the pandemic on the East Coast? So in New York City, the pandemic is pretty bad, but it's getting a little bit better from what I'm hearing on the news and stuff like that. So people are definitely trying to stay inside as much as possible. There's a lot of people that have died here in New York City. Um, so yeah, it's pretty rough, and I know that some of the outer surrounding areas are getting more infected as well. So yeah, it is a little rough right now. I New York is, or at least was, the epicenter for a while here, actually in the world, I believe. So yeah, it's not the best, but we're all trying to keep safe. We're all trying to social distance, all trying to um, keep things cool. All right. Um, Jonathan asks, "Hello, Brent from North Carolina. What are some tips in trying to tackle and learn bebop jazz?" Um, that's a good question, but I think when it comes down to it, and I know this is a very it's kind of an answer like one size fits all, and it's kind of the one I've been saying every single time. But the easiest way to start learning bebop jazz is to learn some bebop heads. So, right, learn a Charlie Parker head. You can start with a simple one, like just a simple blues head, like "Now Is the Time" by Charlie Parker, and then move your way up a little bit, right? Like start to learn um, other blues heads that have bebop in them. Start to learn, then just go to like confirmation or something like that. Now, how do you learn the bebop head? A lot of people have a hard time doing that. Well, you can of course read the notes, but again, I would recommend learning it by ear. So what you should do is just get a slowdowner software like Amazing Slowdowner or Transcribe, and put that head in, that Charlie Parker head, whatever it is, slow it down to as slow as you need to do to get every single one of those notes. Gradually speed it up until you can play that head. Now, the great thing is, if you learn a bunch of different Charlie Parker heads, you are essentially learning solos. So you're learning how to improvise bebop changes. So that's really the way to do it. So slow it down, because that's usually the part that's hard about bebop, is that the changes are going, the notes are going by so fast. So slow it down with slow downer software, and then gradually speed it up, right? And then learn like three or four of those, and then start analyzing what's going on over the chord changes, right? Is he targeting the third? Is he using enclosures or approach notes, chromatic approach notes, to get to different chord tones within the chord? And that's how you really start learning bebop, is learning a bunch of bebop heads. If you learn 10 bebop heads, you would really start to know how to improvise bebop language. All right, I'm going to throw a little bit of wood on this fire. Hold on one second. All right. Nice fire, bro. Thanks, Roman. Appreciate it. Um, hope that helped, Jonathan. Yeah. So, yeah, Michael. Yeah. So, for some reason, I don't have a setting to completely block out a viewer rather than hide his stuff and block individual posts. Um, I'm not really quite sure why that is. I'll have to look at this at the end of this stream so that this doesn't happen again, because this is unfortunately not been the nicest thing for everybody or for me. Um, okay. Well, I'll just keep doing my best. Roman asks, "Is there a Charlie Parker head book with tabs?" I don't know about tabs, but there is the Omni book, right? So a lot of people know about the Omni book. The Omni book is a collection of different Charlie Parker solos or just Charlie Parker heads, or is it solos? I can't remember which one, but you can get the Omni book. So if you want to go through reading some, or actually that'd be a great resource to have is have the Omni book, and then also do it by ear, like I just said. But then you'll have the notes to go back and forth with. So I don't know about the tabs though. You'll have to look into that, but definitely check out the Omni book as far as notation of Charlie Parker solos. Um, okay, moving on. Cosmic Flamingo, when you record yourself, how often is it with the song playing in the background versus just playing by yourself and hearing the song in your head? I do a little bit of both. Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can record yourself. I'm not sure if you're talking about recording yourself practicing or what you mean by that. So you can record yourself with a backing track if you aren't really able to accompany yourself, or if you just want some different context. I think people put up all kinds of rules about how you're supposed to practice and not practice. I think it can get a little bit short-sighted to think that way. Now, obviously, like, you shouldn't only rely on play-alongs to practice with, right? I mean, you don't want any tool to become a crutch at any point. But yeah, I'll do that sometimes, or I'll just set a metronome. So if you're just recording yourself to check back on your practicing, just set a metronome and record along with that, right? If you're a piano player or a guitar player, it can be really good practice for you to practice accompanying yourself and see how you can do that, right? Because if you can develop those skills, that's really important for those particular instruments, right? If you're a horn player, and it's also important for you just to be able to hear the harmony going on. So I think there's a little balance of both. If you're having a hard time playing along without hearing the harmony, well, then go ahead, use some backing tracks or some different things, or play along with an actual recording that you're listening to. But you can also use a backing track a little bit, but then also try just doing it by yourself, right? I don't think there's any hard and fast rules here. Try a little bit of everything. Hope that helps. Jeff Carter, seems that the guide tones are the first step in moving from chord changes to melodic improvisation. Is that accurate? Guide tones being the third and seventh of the chords. So kind of what I think about that is I actually think that chord tones are the best place to start. So root, third, fifth, seventh, right? I think chord tones are the best way to start. I like to, if I'm mapping out the jazz standard, I like to go up one arpeggio and down the next of the next chord, voice leading them together. So I think chord tones are the starting place, right? But then if we really want to narrow down those notes that we want to resolve to, or that we don't have to resolve to them, but by doing so and adding that to our resolutions and our solos and our lines, sometimes that's really going to bring out the chord changes. That's where the thirds and sevenths comes in. So I say chord tones first, then you look at the guide tones. And then if you want, you can fill in the scales, right? So I think about scales as really just playing the notes in between the chord tones. That's my opinion. Again, if you want to start with guide tones, if you to map out a jazz standard, that's completely fine. Chord tones is where I like to start. Um, What do you think of playing pianist solos on the guitar? I've been learning Chick's Matrix recently. It's very challenging. So actually, the very first solo I ever learned was Wynton Kelly's solo on Freddie Freeloader. So I always would encourage, no matter what instrument you play, to to spend some time learning other instrument solos, because sometimes we think too much on our own instruments, and when we are learning solos from other people's instruments, that can really open up some really interesting doors. I've learned saxophone solos, I've learned piano solos, I've learned trumpet solos, I've learned all kinds of solos. So by doing that, you're really helping your musical growth and thinking outside of just your instrument, or at least figuring out how to take that music and applying it. That's really cool that you're learning Chick's solo. There's some really hard piano solos. I was actually listening on Facebook last night. I saw the great guitarist from Los Angeles, Graham Decter. He posted a video of him playing a McCoy Tyner solo on his guitar, and I was like, "Wow, it sounded amazing." Graham Decter is just like incredible, by the way. You should check them out if you've never done that before. Um, so Jeff Carter says Charlie Parker for guitar by Mark Volpel. So that might answer the earlier question about having tabs for Charlie Parker solos. That sounds like a good option right there. Thanks for sharing that, Jeff. I appreciate that. Stuart Palmer, what limitation exercises do you think is great for practice? That's a really good question, Stuart. So what he's talking about is rather than opening up the doors for you to improvise or do whatever you want, right? But like making some confines and rules for you to work with. There are so many you can do, but the one that I like to do a little bit is I set a metronome and I'll start playing just half notes over the form of a jazz standard, right? So there's a challenge in that, right? So I'm just challenging myself to use only half notes to make melodies, right? Then I'll go in the next chorus, I'll do quarter notes, right? So just quarter notes, only quarter notes soloing through the entire form. Then I'll go ahead and I'll do eighth notes. If the tempo is slow enough for me to do it, I'll then move to triplets. So obviously it gets really challenging, right? Because playing continuous quarter notes is one thing. It is hard too. Eighth notes is even harder, right? To like just create continuous eighth note lines. That's why you want to maybe set it at a tempo that is a little bit more accessible for you. And then triplets is even harder, right? And that's not obviously how we want to play, but like you're saying, the benefit of confining in putting limitations on your exercises is that it's working very specific things. So if that there's rhythm and playing longer lines, right? Some of us struggle with that. We play like little stuttering lines that just end and stop, and sometimes some of us are a slave to copy and paste lick playing, and so this can help solve that issue a little bit. That's one. If anybody has any other ideas, feel free to leave them in here. Clifton Reed says, I want to thank you for Band in a Box, which I scored from your podcast website. Bar none, the best piece of music software I've ever used. That is the one that I suggest as far as a practicing tool for looping, playing things back, creating accompaniment tracks, but you can do so much more than that. So glad that you found that helpful. I only would promote something like that I would use and believe in. So that I'm glad that you feel the same way about that. Jordy Joan Sarah Aranda. Wow, long name. What's your best piece of advice for chord recognition? The best piece of advice is to first start with the fundamentals, right? So first start by hearing what a major third interval sounds like, right? Da 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 da, right? And then work on sounding like what a perfect fifth sounds like. Da da, right? Da da, and then work on hearing what a major seventh sounds like if we're doing a major seventh chord. Da, da. So then you can build that chord there. Da, 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 da. Right? That's just the basics, right? You start with the very basic fundamentals. You hear those intervals in between, and then you piece them together. And then what does a dominant seventh chord sound like? Da, 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 da. Right? And you just go through that process so you can do every single quality of seventh chord or even triads as well, right? That would suggest that. I do, by the way, not to be self-promotional or anything on this live stream, I do have an ear training course called How to Play What You Hear that does go over the fundamentals of those, that kind of trains you that way. After that, obviously, that's not training you to hear, inversions and all that stuff. But I sort of don't really think that you need to do that when it comes to the context of learning jazz, right? I mean, so unless you're really trying to get exact voicings down, right? The main thing is if you're just trying to learn a tune and you want to hear what the individual chords sound like, that's the ultimate goal, in my opinion, right? Is you're trying to learn chord progressions by ear. So if you're trying to do that, then that's where I would start. And then you can go from what I was saying earlier about learning chord progressions, listen for those bass notes. And then once you kind of have that idea of what the quality of chords sounds like, right? Then you can sort of like listen for it. Do I hear a minor third there? So that could be a minor seventh chord. It could be a minor 7 flat 5, could be a diminished seventh chord. That's kind of how you start, right? Process of elimination. Or you just start hearing what the sound of a dominant seventh chord sounds like, but you started with those fundamentals about hearing those intervals and being able to sing it from the root up. Hope that helps as just a starting place. Nils asks, do you think the theory and knowledge we as improvisers have of chord tones, arpeggios, etc., should be completely subconscious when soloing, so that you only play the melodies you hear in your head? Yes, that is the ultimate end goal. If you're asking me, Nils, that is where we want to be. So one thing to be sure to understand is when you do exercises like mapping out chord tones or scales or guide tones, these are simply mapping out note choices in the tune, right? That's all you're doing. You're getting familiar on your instrument and in your ear what those sound like. But then it's up to us to create melodies. So while at first, when we're learning how to improvise, yes, we do need to be playing those chord tones and being a little bit more intentional about it. But that's why we also couple those things with learning solos by ear or learning little licks by ear or taking those things to all 12 keys, things that have very much to do with this. I also always recommend people compose their own solos. People compose their own licks. If you do that stuff, you start developing your own language and you're really playing what you're hearing in your head, but you're giving yourself the opportunity to slow that process down. The composition process or the improvisation process slowed down is composition, right? So if you're doing that, that really gives you the opportunity, right, to start hearing those things. So you should never only just be doing chord tones and guide tones and all that stuff. You should also be working on hearing things by ear, composing your own stuff, because that's ultimately where we want to get to. We need a balanced diet. And the only way to get up on the bandstand and really start improvising and playing what you're hearing in your head is to have all those things going for you so that, yes, chord tones and all that becomes subconscious. But the other part of that is I know some people are listening to me saying, yeah, right, Brent, right? That's never going to be second nature to me. It really just is repetition. The more you do something, the more second nature it becomes. There's no easy answers to becoming a great jazz improviser. And I hope that no one ever has felt that I've preached something different. It can be made easier than it's made out to be, but that's really the best way to do it, is repetition. So a healthy diet of all things, repetition, time and pressure equals natural creating of melodies in the spot. Well, okay, and just a follow up to Nils also asks, or do you and other accomplished jazz musicians consciously use chord shapes and arpeggios when soloing? I do, yes, absolutely, I do, because there's certain things that are just muscle memory for me, or I will hear or see a shape, and just knowing what things look on my guitar. Right, I'm a guitar player. Maybe you're a piano player. Maybe you're a horn player. Doesn't matter. We all have muscle memory on our instruments, and so yes, I will do that as well. There's nothing wrong with that, right? As long as like I'm still going for what I'm trying to play, but having those as tools, right? Like feeling or hearing shapes and kind of more of a visual element of improvisation, that's helpful too. Again, I'm not kind of person that likes to put a ton of rules on what you can or can't do to be able to improvise. Moby Strummer, what do you make to the Charlie Bonacos ear training exercise? I don't know if I'm familiar. A cadence is played, and then you hear a note based on its color within the key. Is that more beneficial than isolated intervals? That is definitely beneficial. But also that kind of just is assuming that I feel like, and I could be wrong because I'm not really familiar with the methodology, but that's kind of just assuming that people can hear basic things at all, right? So the reason I preach ear training fundamentals is because a lot of people in my audience here, they just need help being able to hear anything, right? So that's maybe a place to get to, or a place you can get to sooner than later. But I don't, again, I wouldn't say that one is completely better than the other, or that, you shouldn't do one or the other. I think that's a great method, and I've definitely done that myself as well. It's more contextual ear training. Jeff Carter says, "Thank you for sharing your knowledge of music. You are a great teacher, clear and concise, easy to understand." I'm glad. I've been a little flustered on today's call for some of the obvious reasons today, so I'm glad that it's turning out semi okay. Clifton Reed. Sometimes it seems the instrument gets in the way, like the technical feat of playing blocks free creatively in expression. How do you get beyond the instrument? That is a lifelong struggle, Clifton. And I think one tip for that is, yes, indeed, to learn solos on other instruments. We talked about that earlier, because then you're not, let's say you're a piano player and now you're learning how to play a guitar solo or a horn solo. Maybe it's easier on piano. I don't know. Guitar can be difficult. But then you're starting to explore a different approach The other thing is, if you are a guitar player, I get from what you're saying, if you might be a guitar player, but if you're some instrument where you feel there are certain things that you are constantly doing the same, just switch up the context. So I'll use a guitar as an example since I'm a guitar player. So if I learn how to play something in one fingering, I'm going to go and learn that in at least two other different kinds of fingerings, like two completely different ways to play that, right? If I learn how to play a chord, I'm going to learn how to play all the inversions of that, so I know how to play it on all sets of strings. Um, if I learn a melody, I'm going to learn it in a couple different positions, and I'm going to learn it in in multiple different keys. Now that's a lot of work, and you don't have to do all that work every single time. But if you're trying to overcome some of those technical limitations in your instrument, change up the context. Whatever instrument you play, change up the context so that whatever that is, just pinpoint. This is where I'm getting stuck. This is where I'm feeling that the instrument is dictating what I'm doing, and then create an environment where you are literally practicing against that instinct. Does that make sense? Holy crap, my screen is bright. I'm sorry, guys. Um, Malik Price, can you talk about your jazz blues course? I usually don't have the time to practice, but I'm sure we have about another month. Can you help me? So my jazz blues course is called Jazz Blues Accelerator. What we do in that course is it's a practice program. Pretty much all of my courses are practice programs. They're not just like, here's a cool trick, here's a cool trick, here's another cool trick. They're practice programs. So if you don't practice, then you're not going to really enjoy my course. But if you want to practice, then you're going to really enjoy the course. And a lot of other students are too. So essentially what we do is we learn 3 blues heads. We learn 3 etudes that go over specific blues and jazz language techniques. We learn mapping exercises for every single key. So all 12 keys. And we do all that in all 12 keys. So what you do is like there's 3 different modules. So first module, you'll learn a blues head, you'll learn um, an etude, like I said, and you'll learn mapping exercises, which include chord tone, guide tone, and scale maps, right, over the blues form. So the first lesson, you're just doing concert C. So you do concert C, you learn the etude, you learn the head in that key. You post a video of yourself doing it in the community discussion. You get feedback, all that stuff. And then after that, you go to the next key. We do go through the circle of 4. So the next lesson is concert F, and you go through and you do that. So for each etude and each blues head, you're learning it in 4 different keys. And then there's a 5th session for each module where you do a jam session, which is where you compose your own 12-bar etude or improvise, and you share it with everybody in the community. So what I found is by doing this, people leave this course really knowing the blues really well, and learning all of this stuff in so many different keys just kind of like really takes you to the next level. So that's what that course is about. Hope that was helpful. Ron Askew, in my case, when the instrument gets in the way, it's my technique or knowledge that is really in the way. When my instrument gets in the way, it's my technique or knowledge that is really in the way. So another thing that I always recommend to people, Ron, is to practice playing quote unquote free. Now, free, a lot of people say, well, that's on avant-garde or something like that. No, it doesn't have to be avant-garde, but practice literally just improvising whatever you want. I just did a podcast episode recently. Let me look up which one it is so you guys can look it up later. I think I improvised for around 20 or 25 minutes, something like that. I did not preconceive any of it at all. Let's see what episode it was. It was a recent one, episode 212 of the Learn Jazz Standards podcast, called Harnessing Pure Musical Expression, Improv Session with Brent. So I just like improvised, had no idea what I was doing. And what you can just do is do the same thing. Like, so practice, spend time actually in your practice sessions, just 10 minutes, no idea what you're going to play to start with, and just start playing stuff, right? And if you hit a wrong note, quote unquote wrong note, don't try to correct it. Literally go off of that. And if you feel yourself tempted to try to like make things sound good, don't. Just keep going. So that's why it's called, it's practice, right? It takes practice to have that sort of determination to do that. So spend some time practicing playing quote unquote free, just improvising whatever you want, whatever you're feeling. And that can be one way to kind of get your brain out from thinking of shapes and positions and what notes are the right notes and what notes are the wrong notes. So if you can start kind of training your brain to let go of that a little bit, that can be one way to stop doing this. Hope that makes sense. Um, Jeff Carter, have to jump on a work meeting. Thanks, Brent. Hope you do this again soon. Thanks for being here, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Malik, thanks. I will enroll in that course. Awesome. Really excited to have you in there, Malik. CC, nice to have you join us. Jazz vocalist. So I'm going to be ending this this chat here in a second. If you guys want to, there's no pressure to. I'm going to be donating $300 to the Bowery Mission in New York City. They help the homeless. They're a longtime institution that is helps give shelter, helps provide food, and programs for the homeless in New York City. Right now, as a lot of people know, New York City's been hit really hard with the coronavirus, and homeless people don't have a place to stay, right? They don't have a place to quarantine to, right? And so far, there have been a bunch of deaths of homeless people and a lot more people infected. So if you guys would like to donate to that today, you could either leave me a super chat below. I'll be donating all of that money that comes through super chats, the little $ thing at the bottom of the chat. I'll be donating all of that to the Bowery Mission, and I'll be donating $300 myself. You don't have to give anything. Just any small amount will also be cool as well. If you don't want to give through the super chat, you can just go look up the Bowery NYC and the Bowery Mission NYC, and you can donate there too. So really appreciate that. If there's any other questions or anything you guys want, feel free to leave it, and I may have time to answer one more or so. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for dealing with some of the unfortunate troll chats that were going on today. I appreciate you bearing through that with me. Enjoyed this. Hope you enjoyed my fire a little bit. I had fun. I've been having fun making fires. New Yorkers don't get to do that very often, so it's nice to have this resource of mine available. I'm very grateful for that. Remember those defaults I mentioned at the very beginning. I mentioned default to gratitude, default to goal setting, and default to generosity. And those are the things that help me get through hard times. So I hope that those things help you too. And I want you guys all to keep safe. I appreciate all you guys. Stay inside, stay indoors as much as you can. If you're, if you have loved ones who are sick, if you're sick yourself, I'm thinking for you, sending lots of good energy your way. Hope you're doing well. You can always catch me on the podcast and catch me on YouTube. And maybe I'll do this again sometime soon once I figure out how to officially block trolls. And so thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate all of you, and have a good rest of your Wednesday. Cheers, guys.